The double doors of Marlowe & Co.'s flagship kitchen swung shut behind him with a quiet hiss. The hour was late, well past midnight, and the restaurant had closed long ago. Ethan Marlowe stepped into the dim, sterile light that glowed automatically with his motion. The place was supposed to be empty. His polished shoes tapped softly on the marble tile, and his sharp gray suit caught the faint reflection of overhead LEDs. He didn't plan to be here tonight. In fact, no one even knew he was back in the city. His flight from Milan had landed early, and something about the unsettling report from his operations manager had gnawed at him during the ride home. A bad review about sanitation, a few inconsistent staff logs. He hadn't said a word to anyone. He simply redirected his car here. He walked through the prep station, slowly noting a few pans left, stacked to dry, the slight smell of bleach lingering in the air. At first, everything seemed in order, until his heel slipped just slightly. Nothing dramatic, just a fraction of a second, where the ground felt unsure. He looked down. There was a slick sheen of water near the walk-in freezer. Then he saw it. At first, he thought it was just a bundle of cloth. But something was off, the shape, too curved, too human. He crouched low, eyes adjusting, and the breath caught in his throat. There was a girl on the floor, a young woman curled tightly, like a child barely covered by what looked like a kitchen towel. Her skin, pale against the cold floor, was damp and shivering. Her long hair was tangled around her shoulders, sticking to her face and neck. She was barefoot, naked except for that thin strip of cloth twisted around her. For a moment, Ethan froze. The image didn't make sense. She shouldn't be here. No one should. And certainly not like this. He stepped closer, his heartbeat picking up. Kneeling beside her, he checked her pulse. It was faint, but there. Her lips were blue. Her fingers clenched loosely around a damp apron, as if she'd tried to keep it on, but lost strength. Nearby, a pile of soaked clothing lay in a heap, her uniform from the looks of it. Next to it, a small ID card glinted faintly under the flickering light. He picked it up. Lena Hart, cleaner, night shift. Ethan's jaw clenched. He stood and moved quickly to the wall-mounted phone near the service door. Within seconds, he was calling emergency services. Yes, I need an ambulance. Female, mid-20s, unconscious, hypothermic, no visible injuries. Location Marlowe & Co., Fifth Avenue, branch rear kitchen access. As he gave the details, he kept glancing back at the girl, at Lena. Something about the scene lodged itself in his mind like a splinter. Not just the shock of seeing a body on his kitchen floor. It was her expression, even in unconsciousness, tight-guarded. Like someone used to sleeping with one eye open. Footsteps came pounding down the hallway moments later. James, the overnight security guard, appeared panting slightly. "Sir, is everything all right? Call the manager on duty." Ethan said, his voice clipped. "I want to know why a cleaner is unconscious and naked on the kitchen floor of my restaurant." James hesitated, eyes flicking from Ethan to the figure on the ground. He nodded quickly and disappeared again. The ambulance came within minutes. Ethan stayed silent as the EMTs arrived and took over. They moved swiftly, wrapping Lena in blankets, checking vitals, placing an oxygen mask on her face. One of them, a young woman with red hair, turned to him. "She's lucky. If you hadn't found her tonight, another hour, and we'd be looking at a different outcome." "I own this place," he said simply. "That explains why you're here this late," she replied, glancing around. "But not why she was. Neither can I." He said more to himself than anyone else. They loaded her into the ambulance. Ethan followed them out the back exit, the chilled night air brushing against his face like a warning. He paused for a second, then climbed into his private car. To St. Luke's Hospital. Now he told his driver. As the car pulled out onto the empty avenue, Ethan sat back staring out the window, his mind not on the city, but on the image he could not shake. A cleaner, his cleaner, alone and exposed on a tile floor meant for Michelin stars and high society. He tried to recall her face. Had he ever seen her before? He knew the names of his executive chefs, the sommelier, the regional manager. He remembered hiring a new janitorial contractor months ago, something about outsourcing for efficiency. He had never once thought to meet the people who swept the floors after hours. By the time he arrived at the hospital, she was already being examined. He didn't know what compelled him to stay, but he did. An hour passed, then another. Finally, a nurse approached him. "She's stable. We've warmed her body, given fluids. She's resting now. Do you want to see her?" He nodded. The room was quiet, lit only by a low lamp. Lena lay in the hospital bed, small beneath the starched white sheets. Her hair had been brushed back from her face. She looked younger now. Her breathing was soft even, but her cheeks were still pale and her hands were bandaged lightly from exposure. Ethan sat beside her. He didn't say anything for a long time, just watched. Eventually, he pulled out her ID badge and placed it on the tray next to the bed. Then, without really knowing why, he reached into his pocket and left his business card beside it. He scribbled 3 words on the back: "You deserved better." When he left the room, the hallway outside seemed colder than when he had entered. Not from the air, from something inside him that had begun to shift quiet, but undeniable. That night, as his car pulled away from the hospital, Ethan stared out into the New York night, replaying the same image over and over again. Bare skin on white tile. Silence. A girl no one noticed, and a question that would not leave him alone. What kind of man lets someone like that go unseen? The next morning, Ethan sat alone in his private office above the restaurant, the blinds still drawn. The usual hum of the city beyond the window meant nothing to him right now. He hadn't slept, not a single hour. In front of him lay 2 items, Lena Hart's damp ID card and a printed report from the night manager hastily prepared at Ethan's demand. He had read it twice already, and it still made no sense. According to the staff log, Lena had clocked out at 10:57 p.m. Her shift officially ended at 11. No flags, no complaints, no incident reports. So why had she been found unconscious and naked on the kitchen floor just after 1 a.m.? He leaned back in his chair, rubbed his temples, and called for Michael Lynn, his operations director. Michael entered nervously, holding a tablet. "Sir, I've pulled the internal camera footage you requested." Ethan gestured. "Show me." The video played on the large wall screen. At 10:56 p.m., Lena could be seen folding her apron, placing it in a small locker near the side exit, and waving to a coworker who gave her a half-hearted nod. She picked up her bag, walked out the staff door, and vanished from view. Ethan frowned. That matched the time she'd clocked out. He looked at Michael. "Keep going. Fast forward an hour." The hallway camera blinked back to life. There she was again. Lena, same clothes, same bag, walking back in through the side door, alone, head down. She didn't sign in. She didn't talk to anyone. She walked directly to the back kitchen. This time she had on gloves. The footage showed her pulling out cleaning supplies, setting down her bag, and beginning to scrub the walls behind the industrial ovens. A section of the kitchen not part of her assigned area. She worked with intensity, like someone racing a clock no one else could see. At 12:15 a.m., the automated sink triggered spraying too much pressure. Water spilled across the tile. She slipped once, caught herself, then went to the supply closet. She re-emerged with towels, cleaning spray, and what looked like a spare apron. The camera caught the moment she bent over the utility sink to wring out her soaked clothes. When she stood up again, her uniform clung to her like paper. Another 20 minutes passed, and then she went out of frame. 10 minutes later, the footage cut to Ethan's arrival and the chaos that followed. Ethan stared at the frozen image on the screen. His voice came out quieter than he expected. So she came back to clean a place no one asked her to clean. Why Michael hesitated. I asked her coworker Elena. She said Lena kept volunteering for extra work. Said she needed the hours, but we couldn't give her overtime. She was contract, no benefits, limited hours. Ethan's eyes narrowed, but she still came back. Yes, sir. No one stopped her. No one thought to. Ethan stood and walked slowly to the window. The early sun was cutting through the fog, casting pale lines on the carpet. What else do we know about her? Not much. She applied 3 months ago through a staffing agency. Her file says she's 24, lives in Queens, single guardian of a dependent. Ethan turned. A dependent, her mother. Medical records say late-stage renal disease. She's on dialysis 3 times a week. Ethan felt something tighten behind his ribs. Did she ever request assistance? Ask for financial help from the company? No. She barely spoke to anyone. Most of the staff thought she didn't speak English. She just kept her head down, cleaned, left. Ethan looked back at the paused video. This time he noticed more. The way her shoulders curled inward. The thinness of her frame. The hesitance in her steps, like she was afraid of making too much noise. Like she didn't belong in a place built on polished steel and luxury menus. The next call Ethan made was to the hospital. She was stable, awake, resting. Her mother had not yet been contacted. Ethan left immediately. When he arrived at St. Luke's, Lena was sitting upright in her bed fee, still attached to her arm, her eyes distant. She turned when he entered, startled. Mr. Marlowe. Her voice was soft, almost too soft. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for anyone to find me like that. I didn't even know I'd passed out. I thought I could just wait until the clothes dried and leave. I didn't want trouble. Ethan shook his head. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because I saw someone on my kitchen floor who looked like she didn't belong there, not because she broke rules, but because she believed no one would care. Her eyes welled and she looked away. I just wanted to do more, to matter. They said I couldn't have more hours, but I knew. If I kept things cleaner, maybe someone would notice. Maybe they'd let me stay longer. Maybe I could afford Mom's next treatment. She laughed bitterly. Turns out I couldn't even afford to pass out the right way. Ethan didn't smile. Instead, he sat down in the chair beside her bed. No one should ever have to work that hard to be seen. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I'm not a victim. I just needed to be useful. Ethan leaned forward. You nearly froze to death, trying to earn a few more minutes in a place that wouldn't even give you a time card. That's not on you. That's on me. On this company. On the system we built. She looked at him now, really looked. There was no anger in her expression, just exhaustion. I don't need pity, Mr. Marlowe. I need my job. I need to work. Ethan nodded slowly. Then I'm going to make sure when you do, someone actually sees you. She said nothing, just closed her eyes, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Ethan left the room with something in his chest he couldn't name. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. It was recognition, a quiet, aching awareness that somewhere along the way he had stopped seeing people, stopped asking questions, just assumed that if the floor was clean, someone had done their job. He never thought to wonder at what cost. That night back in his office, he pulled Lena's ID badge from his pocket again and stared at the name. For the first time in years, he didn't see a title or a task. He saw a person. And that changed everything. The hospital hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon wax. But to Ethan, it might as well have been silence itself. He stood outside room 312 for a few seconds longer, hand resting on the door handle, debating whether to walk away or step into something he couldn't control. He never liked uncertainties. But this girl, this cleaner, who had nearly died unseen, had made certainty feel hollow. He walked in quietly. Lena was awake, seated upright in the bed now, her legs covered by a thin blanket, her hospital gown wrinkled but dry. Her hair had been brushed out and tied loosely behind her head. She looked startled when she saw him. "You're back," she said, her voice cautious. "I didn't expect you to come again." Ethan nodded, pulling the chair closer to her bedside. "I told you I would." "You didn't have to," she replied quickly. "I'm not your responsibility." "No," he said slowly, "you're not. But I came anyway, because I think I owe you more than silence." She looked away, unsure how to respond. He pulled out a folder. Inside were a few documents. "Your job is safe. For now, I want you to take time to recover. I'll pay for it. Full wage, health coverage, hospital bills. And your mother's dialysis is now covered through our private network." She turned to him, brows furrowed. Why are you doing all this? You don't even know me." He folded his hands. "I'm starting to think that's the problem, that I never tried to." Lena's voice caught. "I didn't want you to notice me not like this. I just needed the hours." Ethan looked her straight in the eyes. No one should have to beg to be seen, especially not while keeping the world running in the dark. Her eyes shimmered. For a moment it seemed like she might cry, but she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath. "Thank you, but I still want to work. I need to feel like I earned this." Ethan nodded. "That's why I have a proposal. I've created a temporary role. Guest hygiene consultant. You'll evaluate the conditions of our cleaning systems across branches. Tell us what's broken, what no one else sees." Lena blinked. "That sounds like a job for someone who matters." "You matter," Ethan said, not blinking. "And I want to learn from someone who's lived the part of the job we've all ignored." She looked away for a moment, unsure whether to believe him. Then almost cautiously she said, "I'll try." That night when Ethan left the hospital, he didn't go home. Instead, he stopped by the restaurant and walked through the same kitchen where he had found her. It was spotless again. But now he noticed things. The missing floor mats near the freezer, the slight draft from the broken window vent, the uneven mop rack that kept dripping water onto the floor. All of it had been there for years, but it had taken a girl half frozen on the tile for him to see it. 2 days later, Lena was discharged. She insisted on taking a cab home herself, despite Ethan offering a driver. Her pride was quiet but unshakable. At her apartment, a narrow walk-up in a quiet part of Queens, she helped her mother settle in with a new caregiver Ethan's team had arranged. The older woman was fragile, soft-spoken, and deeply suspicious of strangers. But when Ethan visited that weekend, she smiled faintly. "You're the man who saw her," she said simply. "The man who didn't step over her." Lena flushed with embarrassment. "Mom, stop." But Ethan just nodded. "I suppose I finally looked down." Over the next few weeks, Lena's role became more than symbolic. She visited 5 branches across Manhattan, working discreetly with cleaning staff, observing, taking notes, and writing reports that were shockingly insightful. She didn't just critique the conditions, she told stories of the woman who walked home at midnight through dangerous streets because there were no bus vouchers, of the man with arthritis still expected to scrub under fryers without ergonomic tools, of the teenager working 2 jobs who was afraid to ask for gloves that fit. Ethan read every word, and then he did something no CEO in his position had done in years. He sat in a janitorial staff meeting and listened, not as a guest, not as a boss, but as a man learning a language he had ignored his whole life. One night after they had completed an inspection in Harlem, Ethan offered to buy Lena dinner, not at one of his sleek, towering restaurants, but at a small noodle shop tucked into a side street near the station. She hesitated but nodded. Inside, over warm bowls of ramen and soft-boiled eggs, they sat in a quiet booth. Lena spoke about her mother, about childhood memories of baking bread in winter, about how she used to sing while cleaning to keep from crying. Ethan listened, really listened. And when he finally spoke, it was not about profits or policy. It was about his own mother. How she died when he was 17, how he had thrown himself into work to avoid ever feeling helpless again. "But you do feel helpless sometimes, don't you?" Lena asked gently. "More than you know," he admitted. She reached across the table and plucked a stray noodle from his tie. For a second, their eyes met. The air shifted. Ethan's hand brushed hers unintentionally, but instead of pulling away, she left it there. And for the first time, there was no wall between them, no hierarchy. Just 2 people bruised in different ways, offering something close to warmth. When they left the restaurant, it was drizzling. Ethan offered her his coat. She declined at first, but he insisted. "You gave me warmth when I didn't know I needed it," he said. "Let me return it." She smiled and wrapped it around herself. They walked side by side, and though nothing was said, both knew that something between them had changed. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't romantic in the way novels promised, but it was real and quiet. A shelter neither of them had known they needed. Weeks passed, and with them, the rhythm between Ethan and Lena began to take shape. It was not something they discussed, but something that unfolded slow, cautious, almost hesitant. At the restaurants, she worked under her new title with quiet precision visiting sites, talking with janitors and cleaners who had never been asked their opinion. Her voice carried weight not because Ethan had given it to her, but because it carried truth. People listened. So did Ethan. Their meetings became frequent at first about work, then not always. Sometimes it was coffee after a site visit or a shared cab when rain surprised them. Sometimes it was long silences on rooftops watching the city shimmer under the weight of its own noise. And still nothing about it was declared. Lena wore her gratitude like armor, and Ethan wore his guilt like a shadow. One afternoon, while walking through the back corridor of the West Side branch, Lena paused near the service lift. She looked tired, not just from work, but from something heavier. Ethan noticed. "Are you okay?" he asked, standing a few feet behind her. She nodded, then shook her head. My mom's worse. The treatments help, but she's tired, Ethan. And I don't know how to keep pretending I'm not scared. Ethan stepped closer. You don't have to pretend. She looked up at him. If I stop pretending, I fall apart. And if I fall apart, who takes care of her? He said nothing, just reached out and placed a hand gently on her back. She didn't pull away. That night he didn't go home. He walked until the city thinned, until the air felt cleaner and the buildings gave way to trees. The park was mostly empty, the kind of quiet space that only existed between midnight and sunrise. He sat on a bench and stared at the ground. The image of her curled on the kitchen floor still haunted him, not because it was tragic, but because it was familiar. He had seen that kind of exhaustion in his mother's eyes, in his own once, and now in Lena's. He didn't want to just rescue her. He wanted to understand her, but he didn't know how to offer comfort without sounding like a man who could buy his way out of pain. The next morning he showed up at her door, not with flowers, not with gifts, but with a simple container of soup he had made himself. She opened the door, startled, her hair unbrushed and eyes puffy from a long night. I thought you'd be in meetings, she said. I was, he replied. Then I left, because this seemed more important. She let him in without a word. Inside her apartment was small but tidy. Her mother lay asleep in the bedroom, the door slightly ajar. Ethan placed the container on the counter. My mom used to make this when I was sick. It doesn't fix anything, but it helps. Lena stared at it, then at him. You cooked myself, he confirmed. She laughed softly, the sound fragile. And here I thought you had people for that. I do, but some things you don't delegate. She sat at the table and began to eat slowly. After a few minutes, she said, Thank you. You didn't have to come here. I know, but I wanted to. That night became something they never spoke about again, but it marked a shift. After that, their silences became more comfortable. They could sit in the same room without speaking and still feel seen. One Friday evening, after an inspection in Brooklyn, Lena invited Ethan to join her and a small group of cleaners for dinner at a local diner. He hesitated at first, unsure if it was appropriate, but she looked at him with that steady, quiet confidence and said, If you want to understand what we carry, you have to sit with us. So he did. At that table over greasy fries and endless coffee refills, he listened to stories of broken backs, missed birthdays, and dreams put on hold for survival. He laughed when they laughed, nodded when they cried, and for the first time he wasn't Mr. Marlowe. He was just Ethan. Lena watched him the entire time, not because she needed his approval, but because part of her couldn't believe he had chosen to be there. After dinner, they walked together to the station. Ethan turned to her as they waited for the train. Thank you, he said, for showing me the parts of this world I never saw. She looked at him, eyes soft. You saw them. You just didn't know what they meant. The train arrived. They didn't move. Finally, Ethan said, May I take you somewhere tomorrow? Somewhere quiet. She hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I'd like that. The next day he took her upstate, just the two of them. No press, no assistants, just a car, a basket of food, and a lake that shimmered under spring light. They sat on the shore, their shoes off feet in the water. Lena tilted her head back. I haven't felt this peaceful in years. Me neither. Ethan admitted. They were quiet a long while. Then she turned to him. Why me? Why did you keep coming back? He looked at her, eyes steady. Because when I saw you on that kitchen floor, I realized I'd spent years building walls to keep the world out. But you made me want to open a door." She didn't answer with words. She leaned forward and kissed him softly, hesitantly, as if unsure whether the world would allow something so tender. But it did, and when she pulled away, she whispered, "I'm scared." "So am I," he replied. "But this feels real, and maybe that's worth being scared for." The following weeks blurred into something that felt both fragile and quietly exhilarating. Ethan and Lena fell into a rhythm that neither of them dared define. Their workdays remained professional, if only just, but their off hours slowly became stitched together with quiet dinners, soft laughter, and the kind of silences that only come when two people feel safe enough to simply exist. Ethan was cautious, not because he doubted his feelings, but because he knew the weight of them. He had spent most of his adult life surrounded by ambition, performance, and polished intentions. Lena was different. She didn't need him. She didn't ask for anything. In fact, she seemed hesitant to accept even the simplest gestures. One evening, after a long shift and a shared meal in her apartment, he handed her a small envelope. Inside was a check, a large one, too large. Lena stared at it in stunned silence. "What is this?" she asked slowly. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I wanted to help. You're helping already," she replied, her tone tighter now. "This feels like payment. It's not. It's support. It's a gift." She looked down at the number again, then placed the envelope back on the table. "I don't want it." He frowned. "Lena, I'm not mad," she interrupted, voice soft but firm. "But I've worked too hard to build a life where I can stand on my own. If I accept that check, I'm afraid I'll forget how to stand." Ethan looked at her and suddenly understood. This wasn't about pride. It was about survival. All her life, she had been offered conditions disguised as kindness, strings wrapped in gold. She didn't want to be saved. She wanted to be believed in. He reached across the table and gently took her hand. "Then let me invest in what you're already building, not by buying it, but by standing beside it." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. That she said quietly, "I can accept." The next day she returned to her inspections with more resolve than ever. Her reports were now being reviewed, not just by Ethan, but by the entire board of operations. And though most of the executives were skeptical, at first her insights were undeniable. Complaints had dropped, staff morale improved, employee retention in janitorial teams had doubled. One afternoon during a review session, a senior manager asked her directly, "How did you figure all this out?" Lena didn't miss a beat. "You listen more when you're invisible." After the meeting, Ethan walked her to the elevator. "You amaze me," he said. She smiled without looking at him. "You amaze me, too." Later that week, Ethan invited her to his townhouse, not for a party, not for business, just dinner. She wore a simple navy dress and no makeup, her hair pinned loosely. When he opened the door and saw her, he stared for a second longer than he should have. "You look like yourself," he said. She laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." Over dinner, they talked about things they had never said aloud. Ethan told her about the pressure of inheriting the family empire at 27, about how he lost his first love because he didn't know how to choose people over success. Lena spoke about her childhood, about being the daughter of a nurse who worked night shifts and still made pancakes every Saturday. They lingered at the table long after the food was gone. The city buzzed softly outside, but inside was warmth. Later, as they stood on the balcony, watching the skyline blink in the distance, Ethan turned to her. "I've been thinking about something, about us." Her breath caught. "What about us?" He hesitated, then said, "I don't want to rush you, but I do want to be with you, fully. Not just in stolen moments, not in silence." She looked at him, eyes unreadable. "Do you know what that means? Being with someone like me? I'm not polished. I carry grief in both hands. I get scared. I pull away." Ethan stepped closer. "Then I'll hold steady when you pull. I'll listen when you go quiet. And I'll never ask you to change a thing." A long pause followed. Then she whispered, "I want that too, but I need to go slow. I need to feel like this is mine too." He nodded. "As slow as you want, as long as you stay." That night they didn't kiss, they didn't even touch. But when she left his home just after midnight, her smile was different. It was the kind that comes not from being won, but from being understood. And Ethan, standing alone in the dark, with the echo of her laughter still hanging in the air, felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not desire, not triumph, just hope, the kind that didn't burn, the kind that healed. Spring melted quietly into summer, and the city grew heavier with heat and motion. But inside the lives of Ethan and Lena, amid something calmer bloomed. They didn't call it love, not yet, but it was there in the way Ethan remembered how Lena took her coffee, in the way she touched his wrist lightly, when his voice grew too sharp, in meetings in the silence they shared, after long days leaning shoulder to shoulder, without the need to speak. Lena still worked harder than ever, insisting on visiting even the smallest branches in outer boroughs. She refused Ethan's offers to send a car instead, catching early trains, walking long blocks, and showing up with her notebook and sharp eyes. And every time she reported something, Ethan listened. He did more than listen. He made changes, real ones, new schedules, health plans, emergency funds. The kind of things that weren't flashy but changed lives. But for Lena, it wasn't the job that wore on her. It was the waiting. Waiting for the day something might shift. That Ethan, so used to controlling rooms and headlines, might realize how fragile her world still was. One evening after a long inspection day in Queens, she arrived home to find her mother coughing weaker than usual. The nurse, a kind woman named Gloria, had done everything right, but nothing could change what Lena already feared. Her mother was slipping. Later that night, Lena sat in the small, dark kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea she couldn't bring herself to drink. When Ethan knocked, she didn't answer right away. He called gently through the door. "Lena, I know you're there." Finally, she opened it. Eyes red. He said nothing at first, just stepped in and sat across from her. She spoke without being asked. "She's worse. The doctors don't say it, but I see it. She's forgetting things. Her hands shake. She barely eats." Ethan reached across the table. "I'll make sure she has everything she needs." "That's not what I want," Lena said, her voice thin. "I don't want you to fix it. I want someone to sit here and not make it go away. Just be here." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." So he sat. For hours they said almost nothing. When her head finally dropped to his shoulder, her breath, even he didn't move. Not when her fingers slid gently into his. Not when the room grew colder. Not even when her mother called faintly from the other room. He stayed. Days later, her mother was hospitalized. Lena was exhausted, splitting her time between hospital rooms and staff meetings, never asking for help, never slowing down. Ethan watched her closely. One evening after she returned returned from the hospital with dark circles under her eyes and silence in her steps. Ethan pulled her into a private office and closed the door. "I want you to take time off," he said. "Not because I think you're weak, but because I think even strong people break if they're never allowed to rest." She looked up, something vulnerable flashing across her face. "I don't want to feel like I'm walking away from everything." "You're not," Ethan said. "You're walking toward something that needs you more right now. Let me hold things here." She stared at him, then slowly nodded. "Just a few days. I'll come back. I always do." Ethan smiled. "I know, and I'll be here." True to his word, Lena stepped back. She stayed with her mother day and night, holding her hand, during dialysis reading aloud from old recipe books and humming songs they used to sing when she was a child. She still called Ethan late at night, sometimes just to say she was tired. And every time he answered, when the call came that her mother had passed, Ethan was already halfway to the hospital. He found Lena sitting alone in the hallway, her hands in her lap, eyes dry but distant. She didn't cry, not until he sat beside her and whispered, "I'm so sorry." Then she turned, buried her face in his chest, and wept in a way she hadn't allowed herself before. That night, Ethan took her home. He didn't ask if she wanted company. He simply made tea, sat beside her, and stayed. When she fell asleep on the couch, he covered her with a blanket and spent the night in a chair nearby, watching the slow rise and fall of her breath. In the days that followed, he helped with everything funeral arrangements, clearing the hospital records, ensuring the nurse Gloria received full pay. But more than that, he made space. He didn't fill the silence with distractions or platitudes. He simply existed beside her, steady and patient. 1 week after the funeral, Lena stood in the doorway of his office. "I'm ready to come back," she said quietly. Ethan stood. "Only if you're sure." "I am, but things feel different now, like I'm standing in a different life." He walked over and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Then let's build this new one together." Her eyes shimmered. "Okay, but no saving, no rescuing, just walking beside me." He nodded. "Always." That night they didn't go to separate homes. Lena stayed, not out of grief, not because she was fragile, but because she chose to. And when Ethan wrapped his arms around her in the quiet of his bedroom, when she turned toward him and touched his face with trembling fingers, it wasn't about comfort. It was about belonging. Not possession, not escape. Just two people learning how to stay. The leaves began to turn in early September, crisp air curling through the edges of the New York skyline, and with it came a quiet shift in the rhythm of everything. Lena had returned to her work with new steadiness, but something had changed, not just in her, but in Ethan too. The company felt different. Staff smiled more. Janitors who once hurried out unseen now lingered, greeted by name. New programs had been quietly launched: scholarships for children of cleaning staff, emergency leave support, even free counseling. Ethan had called them Lena's initiatives, though she had never asked him to name anything after her. When she found out, she confronted him, standing in his office with that quiet fire he had grown to admire. "You didn't have to make me the face of your apology tour." Ethan looked up, startled. "That's not what this is." She folded her arms. "Then what is it?" He stood and walked to her slowly. "This isn't penance. This is foundation. What I build next, I want it to be with you in it. Not because you almost died on a kitchen floor, but because you made me see the ground I was walking on." Lena's expression softened, but her voice remained steady. "I won't be anyone's symbol. I'm not here to remind you of what you almost missed. I'm here because I choose to stay. And I won't stay if this becomes about pity." Ethan reached out, taking her hands gently. "Then let it be about love. Let it be about a man who sees a woman standing on her own and chooses to walk beside her, not to save her, not to claim her, but to be changed by her." Lena blinked, startled by the word love, and then something inside her loosened. This whole time, she had guarded herself like a house built on shifting sand. But now in his eyes she saw steadiness, not perfection, not promises, but presence, the kind of love that didn't sweep in with roses and confessions, but grew quietly from shared pain and mutual dignity. Weeks later, they made it official, not with headlines or diamond rings, but with a shared apartment, a worn brown couch, and 2 toothbrushes resting side by side. Lena kept her work. Ethan kept his meetings, but they began and ended their days together, coffee and warm silences in the morning, soft dinners, and untangled memories at night. One evening, after a long day reviewing policies, Lena sat on the balcony, curled in one of Ethan's old sweaters. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist. "You look like you belong here," he whispered. She leaned into him. "I do, but not because you made room, because I carved space for myself, and you honored it." He kissed the side of her head. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure that space never closes again." Lena turned, searching his face. "I used to think love was about rescue, about someone showing up and pulling you out of the dark. But it's not, is it? It's about someone willing to sit with you in it." Ethan smiled. "Then let's keep sitting until the light finds us." In the months that followed, their story became an open secret. Some called it a scandal, at first a billionaire CEO in love with a cleaner. But the rumors faded when people saw how Ethan looked at Lena in meetings, how she spoke beside him with calm authority, how they moved together without artifice or apology. She wasn't his weakness. She was his witness, the one who had seen him at his coldest and still stayed. And he in turn had learned what it meant to love without conditions. One winter morning, almost a year to the day since he found her on that cold kitchen floor, Ethan walked into a staff breakfast held for maintenance workers across the company. Lena stood beside him. The workers clapped. Some cried. Ethan raised his glass. This company was built on polished surfaces and silent labor, but the future will be built on names, on dignity, on the people we overlooked for too long. He turned to Lena. "This woman showed me what I never saw. And loving her has taught me that strength isn't silence, it's empathy, it's presence, it's staying when it's hard." That afternoon, Lena walked through the same hallway where she used to mop floors unseen. Only this time people stepped aside, not out of fear but out of respect. And as she passed the kitchen where it had all begun, she paused. The floor was clean. A mat now lay beneath the sink. A heater had been installed beneath the drafty vent, and above the mop rack hung a small plaque, "For the ones we forgot to see." She smiled, then turned away, not because she needed to hold on to the past, but because she had already stepped into something new. A life not given, not saved, but chosen. And beside her walked a man who no longer needed to be cold to feel strong, because now they carried the warmth together,